My daughter-in-law called to cheerfully announce they were skipping my first Thanksgiving as a widower for a luxury trip to Paris, so I wished them the time of their lives. She assumed my grief had made me weak, but she forgot that I wrote the trust fund document that paid for her entire lifestyle, and I was about to teach her the true meaning of the word discretionary. Before we dive into this intense story, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. We'd also love to know where you're all tuning in from. Let us know in the comments. The silence in the house had become a physical presence. It had been 8 months since my wife Clara had passed, and in that time I had learned the different textures of quiet. There was the hollow quiet of the morning, where her side of the bed remained perfectly smooth. There was the heavy quiet of the evening, when the television did little to fill the space once occupied by her laughter. As a retired estate lawyer, I had spent my life helping others put their affairs in order, but nothing could have prepared me for the profound disorder of a life without its other half. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the worn leather a familiar comfort, staring at a framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It was of Clara and me on our 30th anniversary, her head resting on my shoulder, both of us beaming. We had built a beautiful life, a sturdy life, founded on mutual respect, hard work, and a deep, abiding love. We had raised a wonderful son, Daniel, and poured all our hopes into him. That photo was my anchor, a reminder of the foundation upon which my entire world was built. The phone rang, its shrill tone slicing through the afternoon stillness. I glanced at the caller ID, Jessica, my daughter-in-law. A small, hopeful smile touched my lips. Thanksgiving was just 2 weeks away, and it was to be the first one without Clara. I had been steeling myself for the difficulty of it, but the thought of having Daniel and Jessica at the table, filling the house with some semblance of life, was the one bright spot on a bleak horizon. I had already planned the entire menu around Clara's favorite dishes, a small tribute to the woman who had been the heart of our family. Jessica, hello, I said, trying to inject some warmth into my voice. Norman, hi, how are you? Her voice was unnervingly cheerful, pitched at a volume that always seemed designed for an audience. I'm doing all right, my dear, just a quiet day. I was actually about to call you and Daniel to finalize things for Thanksgiving. I was thinking of roasting a turkey the way your mother-in-law always liked, with the sage and thyme stuffing. There was a brief, almost imperceptible pause on her end. Oh, well, that's actually why I'm calling, she said, her voice somehow becoming even more effervescent. We have the most amazing news. My parents just surprised us with the most incredible gift. They're taking us to Paris for the week, all expenses paid. Can you even believe it? We leave the Monday before Thanksgiving. I gripped the arm of the chair, my knuckles turning white. Paris. The word seemed to come from a great distance. I pictured the empty dining room, the single place setting, the ghost of a family meal. The silence I had been living in suddenly felt less like an absence and more like a void threatening to swallow me whole. Paris, I managed to repeat, my voice sounding thin and unfamiliar to my own ears. Yes, isn't it just divine? Mom found this incredible deal on first-class tickets and will be staying at a hotel with a view of the Eiffel Tower. I'm already planning all my outfits. It's going to be the trip of a lifetime, she gushed, completely oblivious to the crater she had just blasted into my world. There was no apology in her tone, no hint of regret, not even a token, "We'll miss you." There was only the breathless excitement of a person for whom my grief, my traditions, my first holiday alone, were nothing more than a minor scheduling inconvenience. I thought of my son Daniel. Was he standing next to her, nodding along? Had he forgotten the countless Thanksgivings with his mother, the way she would let him sneak a piece of turkey while she was carving, the warmth of a home filled with love and tradition? It was a betrayal that felt sharp and visceral, a twisting knife of casual disregard. I took a slow, steadying breath. Years of professional composure, of sitting across from grieving families and navigating delicate situations, came to my aid. My emotions receded, replaced by a cold, clear focus. I would not give her the satisfaction of hearing me crack. Well, I said, and the calmness in my own voice surprised me. How wonderful for you, Jessica, have the trip of a lifetime. Oh, we will, I'll post tons of pictures so you can see everything, she chirped. Okay, have to run, so much to plan, talk soon. The line went dead. I slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle. I stared at the photograph on the mantel, at Clara's smiling face. The cheerfulness in Jessica's voice, the utter lack of empathy, had hurt more than open cruelty ever could. She and Daniel were so focused on their trip of a lifetime, funded by her parents, living a lifestyle supplemented by a trust I carefully managed. A trust funded by the very woman whose memory they were so casually disrespecting. The betrayal was worse than the loneliness itself. The immediate aftermath of the phone call was a suffocating wave of quiet. The house, which had moments before felt merely empty, now felt desolate. I walked into the dining room and stood before the long, polished mahogany table Clara had picked out decades ago. It had hosted countless celebrations, arguments, and quiet family dinners. I could almost see her at the head of the table, a gentle smile on her face as she watched Daniel recount a story from school. Now I pictured it set for one, a solitary island in a sea of grief. The pain was so acute, so physical, that I had to place a hand on the back of a chair to steady myself. Jessica's breezy dismissal echoed in my mind. It wasn't just that they were going away, it was the way she had announced it. It was the complete erasure of my feelings, of Clara's memory, of the significance of this first holiday. It felt like they were not just skipping a meal, they were skipping my grief. My first instinct was to call Daniel. He was my son, he had to understand. Surely he hadn't intended for it to be this cruel. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over his contact number. I needed to hear his voice, to hear an apology, an explanation, anything that would soothe this raw, gaping wound. He answered on the second ring, "Dad, hey." His voice was subdued, a stark contrast to his wife's peppy tone. He knew, of course he knew. "Daniel," I began, my voice measured. "Jessica called me." "Oh yeah, she said she was going to," he mumbled. It's pretty amazing, right, Paris?" There it was, the weakness. The apologetic yet resigned tone of a man who had long ago ceded control of his own decisions. He was trying to sell it to me and to himself. "She seemed very excited," I said, leaving a space for him to fill with the words I needed to hear. "I'm sorry, Dad, I know this is hard for you. We should have talked about it first." But the words never came. Instead, there was just shuffling on the other end of the line. "Yeah, she is. Her mom is just, you know how she gets when she has an idea in her head." He was blaming his mother-in-law, another sign of his passivity. He was a good man, my son. A kind-hearted history teacher who could passionately detail the fall of the Roman Empire, but could not seem to stand up for his own family's history. "I was looking forward to seeing you both, Daniel," I said softly. "It's the first one without your mother." A long, heavy sigh. "I know, Dad, I really do, I'm sorry. We'll do something when we get back. We'll have a big Christmas, I promise." A promise for later to paper over the hurt of now. It was a hollow gesture and we both knew it. I felt a profound sense of disappointment settle over me, heavier than the grief itself. My son loved me, I knew that. But he was caught in an orbit around his wife and her gravitational pull was stronger than mine. "All right, son," I said, the energy draining from me. "You have a good time, be safe." "We will love you, Dad." "I love you too." I hung up the phone and felt a chill creep into the room that had nothing to do with the autumn air. It was the chill of being truly alone. Not just alone in my house, but alone in my values, in my understanding of what family meant. For an hour I sat in my chair, letting the feelings wash over me, the sorrow, the anger, the deep, aching loneliness. But then something shifted. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the living room, the grief began to recede, and in its place a different feeling began to crystallize. It was a cold, hard resolve. I was a retired estate lawyer. For 40 years, I had dealt with complex family dynamics, with greed, with entitlement, with people who saw inheritances as jackpots and not legacies. I had protected my clients' wishes with meticulously crafted documents, with clauses and subclauses designed to prevent the very kind of behavior I was now witnessing. They saw me as a grieving old man, fragile and sentimental, a relic from a bygone era who could be placated with a vague promise of Christmas. I stood up and walked to my study. The room was lined with books, legal texts, and financial journals. It was the one room in the house that was more mine than Clara's, the seat of my professional life. I knelt and spun the combination dial on the large fireproof safe hidden behind a false panel of bookshelves. With a soft click, the heavy door swung open. Inside, nestled among other important papers, RS was a thick leather-bound portfolio embossed with the words, "The Daniel C. Norman Family Trust." I lifted it out, it felt heavy in my hands, a weight of responsibility and purpose. I placed it on my mahogany desk, the same desk where I had drafted this very document with Clara by my side years ago. I ran my hand over the smooth leather. They had forgotten who I was. They had forgotten what I used to do for a living. And they had certainly forgotten what was written on page 17 under Section 4, Subclause B. The trust was Clara's idea. We had been fortunate in life, not through lottery wins or flashy ventures, but through decades of disciplined work and prudent investing. I built a successful law practice specializing in estates, and Clara, with her keen eye for value, had made several wise real estate investments early on. We didn't live extravagantly. Our greatest luxury was the security we had built, a fortress against the uncertainties of the world. Our dream was never to be rich but to be free, and to give our son that same freedom. "I don't want the money to be a burden, Norman," Clara had said one evening as we sat on the porch, watching the fireflies flicker in the twilight. Daniel was in college then, full of ideals and passion for history, a field not known for its lucrative salaries. "I wanted to be a safety net, not a hammock. I wanted to give him the freedom to be a teacher, to follow his heart without worrying about a mortgage. But I don't want it to rob him of his ambition." That conversation was the genesis of the trust. As an estate lawyer, I knew the dangers of handing a large sum of money to a young person outright. I had seen it destroy families, extinguish motivation, and attract the wrong kind of people. So I structured the trust with meticulous care. It was an ironclad document, a fortress built of legal prose, designed to protect Daniel as much from others as from himself. The principal was untouchable until he turned 50. The income it generated could be used to supplement his salary, to help with major life purchases like a home, and to cover what the document termed reasonable lifestyle and travel expenses. And to ensure it was managed with the values Clara and I held dear, I named myself the sole trustee, with absolute discretion over those distributions. Then 5 years ago, Daniel brought Jessica home to meet us. She was polished, almost blindingly so. Her clothes were immaculate, her smile was perfect, and her compliments were effusive. She praised Clara's cooking, my taste in art, the charm of our home. It was a flawless performance, but it felt like a performance nonetheless. During dinner, she guided the conversation with a surgeon's skill. "Oh, being a history teacher is so noble, Daniel," she'd said, placing a hand on his arm. "It's so important to do what you love without having to worry about the practical side of things. You're so lucky to have that freedom." The comment was ostensibly a compliment, but the way she glanced at me when she said it felt like a probe. Later, while I was clearing the plates, she asked about my practice. "Estate law, how fascinating. You must see so many interesting family situations. It must be so complicated figuring out who gets what." Her interest felt less like curiosity and more like reconnaissance. After they left, Clara was unusually quiet as we cleaned the kitchen. Finally, she paused, her hands submerged in the soapy water. "She's very shiny, isn't she?" "Shiny?" I asked, unsure of what she meant. "Everything about her," Clara clarified, a thoughtful frown on her face. "Her words, her nails, her teeth, it's all so bright. I just hope Daniel can see what's underneath all that shine." It was the most she would ever say against Jessica, but it was enough. Clara had an instinct for people, a quiet wisdom that I had learned to trust implicitly. She saw the calculation behind the charm. And she was right. After they married, Daniel's spending habits began to change. Or rather, their spending habits changed. There were expensive weekend getaways, designer clothes that appeared on Jessica's social media feed, and a new luxury car that was far beyond the budget of a high school teacher and a part-time social media manager. All of it was funded by discretionary draws from the trust. Each time Daniel would call, a little sheepish, to request the funds. "Jessica found an amazing deal on a resort," or "Jessica says we need a more reliable car." I approved them, albeit with growing reservation. I didn't want to create a rift with my son, and I told myself that this was what the money was for, to allow them some enjoyment in life. But now her cheerful, dismissive phone call had reframed everything. This wasn't about enjoyment anymore. It was about entitlement. It was about a woman who saw the family's legacy not as a gift to be honored, but as a resource to be exploited. She was reaping the rewards of Clara's hard work while simultaneously disrespecting her memory. The shine Clara had talked about was the cold, hard gleam of opportunism. And as I sat in my study, the trust document opened before me, I knew my inaction was over. I was no longer just a grieving father. I was the trustee, and it was my duty to protect the spirit, not just the letter, of Clara's legacy. The weekend passed in a blur of quiet planning. The initial sting of betrayal had subsided, replaced by the familiar, comforting hum of professional focus. Grief had made me passive, but purpose was sharpening my senses. I spent hours in my study, not stewing in anger, but working with the cold, methodical precision that had defined my career. This wasn't about revenge, I told myself. It was about correction, a course correction for my son's life and a reinforcement of my late wife's intentions. My investigation didn't require a private detective or any clandestine maneuvers. All the evidence I needed was right here, in the meticulously kept ledgers I maintained for the trust. As trustee, I had records of every distribution request, every transfer, every expenditure that Daniel had justified as a lifestyle expense. I opened a fresh spreadsheet on my computer and began to build a financial narrative of the last 2 years. I categorized every withdrawal: travel, automotive, dining and entertainment, apparel and accessories. The numbers told a story that was more damning than any whispered accusation. The travel category alone was staggering. There was a ski trip to Aspen, a long weekend in Miami, a spa retreat in Arizona, and now Paris. The expenses were not those of a history teacher supplementing his income, but of a couple living a life of leisure far beyond their means. Jessica's part-time job as a social media manager seemed to consist mainly of posting photos of these very excursions. The most illuminating column was the one I labeled source of request. In every single instance, the justification Daniel had provided over the phone began with the same word, Jessica. Jessica found a great deal. Jessica thinks we should. Jessica saw this and thought my son had become a passive conduit for his wife's desires. My plan began to form, elegant in its simplicity. I wouldn't need to yell or make accusations. The trust document itself would be my voice. I spent Sunday afternoon drafting a formal letter. It was addressed to Daniel C. Norman, beneficiary, from Norman A. Norman, trustee. The language was professional, detached, and utterly impersonal. It was the kind of letter I had written hundreds of times for my clients. It began, Dear Daniel, in my capacity as trustee of the Daniel C. Norman Family Trust, and in accordance with my fiduciary duty to uphold the stated intentions of the grantor, Clara E. Norman, I am writing to inform you of a formal review of all recent and future discretionary distributions. The letter went on to gently, but firmly, outline the purpose of the trust, quoting Clara's own words from her personal letters which I had appended to the trust charter, to provide a safety net, not a hammock. It then detailed the process for all future requests. From this point forward, any discretionary request over $1,000 would require a formal written proposal at least 30 days in advance, detailing the purpose of the expense and how it aligned with the long-term goals of the trust. Spontaneous, luxury expenditures would, for the foreseeable future, be deemed outside the scope of reasonable lifestyle support. The final paragraph was the master stroke. It was my clever trap, hidden in plain sight within the dense foliage of legal terminology. Please note that effective immediately, the Trust's affiliated credit accounts designated for travel and entertainment expenses will be temporarily suspended pending the completion of this financial review. For any pre-planned travel, such as your upcoming trip to Paris, you will need to secure your own funding. You may submit a request for potential reimbursement upon your return, which will be evaluated based on the new criteria. I printed the letter on my official letterhead, signed it, and scanned it. I also scanned the ledger of their spending and the pages from Clara's letters. It was an unassailable dossier of fact. They could argue with a grieving father, but it was much harder to argue with a spreadsheet and the documented wishes of a beloved, deceased woman. On Monday morning, exactly 1 week before their planned departure, I attached the documents to an email and sent it to Daniel's personal address. The subject line was simple, important information regarding your trust. I didn't send it to Jessica. My business was with the beneficiary, not his wife. Then I made one phone call to the private wealth manager at the bank that administered the trust's accounts. Good morning, Tom, I said. It's Norman. I need you to place a temporary suspension on His supplementary credit card account ending in 4822, effective immediately. I'll be sending over the official trustee directive in 5 minutes. There was no argument, no question, just a simple, of course, Norman, I'll take care of it right now. The trap was set, the pieces were in place. All I had to do now was wait for the inevitable phone call from Paris, and I had a feeling it wouldn't be nearly as cheerful as the last one. The silence that followed was telling. For 3 days I heard nothing. I imagined Daniel receiving the email, his stomach dropping as he read the cold, legalistic prose. I pictured him trying to explain the situation to Jessica, her initial confusion turning to indignant rage. They were likely scrambling, trying to figure out if I was serious, if I could actually do this. They were operating under the delusion that my love for my son would be a weakness they could exploit. They failed to understand that my love for my son was the very reason I was doing this. The call came on Friday evening, which would have been late morning for them in Paris. I had just finished my simple dinner of soup and bread and was reading in the study. The phone rang, and the caller ID displayed Daniel's number, but I knew who would be on the other end of the line. I let it ring 3 times before answering, taking a moment to compose myself. Hello, I said calmly. Norman, what is the meaning of this? What have you done? It was Jessica, and her voice was a furious hiss, the cheerful veneer stripped away to reveal the raw entitlement beneath. Jessica, to what are you referring? I asked, keeping my tone level and inquisitive as if I were a simple third party to the matter. Don't you play dumb with me, she shrieked, her voice echoing slightly, suggesting she was on speakerphone. The hotel, they just declined the card, the one we always use. They said it was suspended, in front of everyone. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? In the background, I could hear Daniel's muffled voice. Jess, calm down, let me talk to him. No, I want to know why he's trying to ruin our trip, she shot back, her voice rising in pitch. This was a gift, you have no right. Actually, Jessica, I have every right, I said, my voice still quiet but now infused with the authority of my position. I am the trustee. My only legal obligation is to the trust and its beneficiary, Daniel. Did he not share the letter I sent him? There was a tense pause. Some ridiculous letter, she spat, full of legal nonsense. You can't just cut us off, we're in Paris. I haven't cut you off, I corrected her gently. I have, as is my fiduciary duty, placed a temporary hold on discretionary luxury spending pending a financial review. As my letter clearly stated, the trust is a safety net, not a limitless bank account for spontaneous first-class vacations. Your trip to Paris, however lovely, does not meet the criteria for a necessary or reasonable expense under the current circumstances. Under the current circumstances, she mimicked, her voice dripping with scorn. You mean because we didn't want to come to your sad little Thanksgiving dinner? The cruelty of her words was like a physical blow, but I had anticipated it. I had armored myself against it. Her lashing out was the predictable response of a manipulator who was losing control. The circumstances, I said, my voice turning to ice, are that the trust has been funding a lifestyle that is unsustainable and, more importantly, contrary to the wishes of its grantor, my late wife, and Daniel's mother. I heard Daniel's voice, clearer this time, pleading. Dad, please, we're in a real bind here. The hotel is holding our luggage. We can't check in. Can you please just turn the card back on? We'll talk about everything when we get home. It was the plea of a cornered child, and my heart ached for him. But to yield now would be to fail him completely. No, Daniel, I can't, I said, my voice softening slightly. This is not something we can talk about later. This is the consequence of choices that have been made. Jessica's parents gifted you the trip, I believe. Perhaps they can assist you with the hotel accommodations. I knew her parents lived well beyond their means, their generosity a performance propped up by debt. I was calling her bluff. A choked, furious sound came from Jessica. You are a cruel, bitter old man. You're just angry that we chose to be happy instead of sitting around your dusty old house feeling sorry for ourselves. Her words were meant to wound me, to paint me as the villain, a lonely tyrant punishing them for his own misery. But the attack was so poorly executed, so transparently self-serving that it had the opposite effect. It was the sound of desperation. The mask had not just slipped, it had been shattered. I am the man your mother trusted to protect you, Daniel, I said, speaking directly to my son. And that is what I am. You are a grown man, I suggest you figure this out. I have acted in full accordance with my legal and moral obligations. Read the letter, read your mother's words. I have nothing more to add at this time. With that, I gently hung up the phone. I did not feel triumphant. I felt a deep and profound sadness, but beneath it there was a bedrock of resolve. The first confrontation was over. They now knew I was serious. The real battle, the one for my son's understanding, was about to begin. The fallout from their disastrous trip was immediate and intense. They had, as I suspected, been forced to rely on Jessica's parents, who, after much drama, had put them up in a cramped budget hotel far from the city center. Their trip of a lifetime had devolved into a week of bickering and recriminations. Jessica's social media, usually a glossy catalog of curated perfection, went ominously silent. When they returned, the campaign against me began in earnest. Jessica, feeling her control over Daniel and his finances slipping, went on the offensive. She portrayed me as a vindictive monster, a lonely old man using money to punish them for having a life. She tried to enlist other family members, calling my sister and cousins with a tearful, heavily edited version of the story. I don't know what's gotten into him, she'd sobbed to my sister, who called me immediately after, confused and concerned. He's just so angry since Clara passed. He's cutting Daniel off completely, all because we went away for a few days. To her credit, my sister knew me better than that. Norman, what on earth is going on? She asked. Jessica just called me in hysterics. I am simply doing my job as trustee, Helen, I explained calmly. I'm enforcing the rules that Clara and I established years ago, nothing more, nothing less. But the true battle was for Daniel. He was caught in the crossfire, torn between his wife's fury and a dawning, uncomfortable truth. He called me a few days after their return. His voice was strained. Dad, this has gone too far, he said, his voice low, as if he didn't want to be overheard. She's a wreck. You've put us in an impossible position. The position you're in is a result of your collective choices, son, I replied gently. Not my actions. My only action has been to hold up a mirror. It's not my fault if you don't like the reflection. She thinks you hate her. This has nothing to do with hatred, I said firmly. It has to do with responsibility and respect for your mother's legacy. I knew words were not enough. Daniel was a history teacher. He was a man who dealt in facts, in primary sources, in evidence. Jessica was trafficking in emotional manipulation, but I had an arsenal of irrefutable proof. The time had come to deploy it. Daniel, I said, my tone shifting from defensive to proactive. I'm not going to argue with you or Jessica over the phone. I am going to send you a package. It will contain a few documents. All I ask is that you read them. Alone. Read them and then decide for yourself what is true and what is not. He hesitated. What kind of documents? Just read them, son, for your mother's sake. That afternoon, I went to my study and assembled my case. It was more powerful than any argument I could ever make. The first document was a clean copy of the trust agreement, with the key clauses about trustee discretion and the grantor's intent highlighted in yellow. The second was the detailed spreadsheet I had created, a 2-year history of their spending that painted a stark picture of excess and entitlement. The numbers were cold, hard, and undeniable. The final item was the most important. It was a letter sealed in a pale blue envelope. Clara had written it a few years prior during one of her hospital stays. She had given it to me with specific instructions. Give this to Daniel after I'm gone when he needs it most. I knew that time was now. I placed everything in a large manila envelope and sent it via courier to Daniel's office at the high school, ensuring it wouldn't be intercepted by Jessica at home. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Daniel. There was no anger in his voice, only a quiet, broken humility. Dad, he began, his voice thick with emotion. I got the package. I'm at my desk. I just read Mom's letter. He paused, and I could hear him take a ragged breath. I had no idea. The things she wrote about her hopes for me, about what she wanted the money to mean, she said she wanted it to be a foundation, not a ceiling. She loved you more than anything, Daniel, I said softly. I know, and I've been letting her down, he said, his voice cracking. I saw the spreadsheet, Dad. I never looked at it all together like that. I just kept saying yes. It was easier to just say yes. I've been so weak, so blind. The wall of denial, so carefully constructed by Jessica's influence and his own passivity, had finally crumbled. He saw the truth, not because I had shouted it at him, but because he had read it in his mother's own words and seen it in the stark, black-and-white reality of the numbers. What do I do now, Dad? He asked, sounding like the young boy who used to come to me for help with his homework. You become the man your mother always knew you were, I said. The spell was broken. Now he would have to face the sorceress. The showdown was not of my design. I had expected a quiet conversation, a slow process of rebuilding my relationship with Daniel. But Jessica, sensing her influence over him evaporating, made a final, desperate gambit. Daniel had asked to have dinner with me a week after he received the package. Just the two of us, Dad, he'd specified on the phone. At that little Italian place Mom used to love. The choice of venue was significant. It was a place of memory, of our shared history. He wanted to reconnect with his roots, with the family Jessica had tried so hard to overwrite. We were seated in a quiet booth at the back of the restaurant, the air filled with the comforting smells of garlic and oregano. For the first hour we talked, truly talked for the first time in years. Daniel was deeply ashamed. He spoke of how he had allowed Jessica's desire for a certain lifestyle to cloud his judgment, how he had taken the path of least resistance, avoiding conflict at the cost of his own principles. Mom's letter, it was like she was in the room with me, he said, his eyes glistening. She talked about Grandpa losing his business and how that fear always stayed with her. The trust wasn't about being rich. It was about never having to feel that kind of fear. It was about security. And I let Jessica turn it into a shopping budget. He looked me in the eye, his expression full of remorse. I am so sorry, Dad, for Thanksgiving, for everything. I let you down. I let her down. It was the apology I had longed to hear, but it was no longer about me. It was about him reclaiming himself. Your mother would be proud of you right now, son, I said, reaching across the table to put my hand on his. It was at that precise moment of reconciliation that Jessica appeared. She must have followed him. She strode toward our table, her face a mask of cold fury. She was dressed impeccably as always, but for the first time her polished exterior looked brittle, like a china doll on the verge of cracking. Well, isn't this cozy, she said, her voice dripping with venom. She didn't look at me, her eyes were locked on Daniel. A secret little meeting to plot against me. Daniel slowly removed his hand from mine and stood up. He wasn't flustered or defensive. He was calm, his spine straight. The passivity that had defined him for years was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable strength. This isn't about you, Jessica, he said, his voice even. This is about me and my father. This is my family. Please don't make a scene. Oh, I think I will, she sneered, her voice rising, drawing the attention of nearby diners. I think I'll make a very big scene. Your father has stolen from us. He is trying to control us with money. This was her final play, to cause a public humiliation, to force Daniel to side with her out of sheer embarrassment. She had miscalculated badly. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. No one has stolen anything, Jessica, he said, his words cutting through her tirade. The only thing that's happened is that my eyes have been opened. The money you've been so freely spending belongs to a trust. It's not a joint bank account. It's a legacy from my mother. Your mother, she scoffed. She's been gone for months. We're living our lives. The color drained from Daniel's face. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. That legacy, he said, his voice dangerously low, that woman you speak of so dismissively is the reason you have the car you drive, the clothes you wear, and the vacations you take. It was a gift of security, and you treated it like a lottery win. You have shown it and her memory nothing but disrespect. He took out his wallet, pulled out a credit card, his own, from the bank account his teacher's salary was paid into, and placed it on the table to cover the bill. This is over, Jessica, he said, his voice filled with a finality that was absolute. Our lifestyle is going to change, drastically. You can either get a full-time job and be a part of our new reality, or you can find someone else to fund your fantasies, but the Bank of Norman is closed, permanently. Jessica stood there speechless. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She had lost. Her power, her influence, her control, it had all vanished in a quiet Italian restaurant. In front of the one man she thought she had defeated, she had been utterly and completely exposed not by my actions, but by the quiet resolve of the son she had so profoundly underestimated. She turned her perfect composure finally shattering and fled from the restaurant. Daniel sat back down, a long, shuddering sigh escaping his lips. He looked exhausted but also free. The showdown was over and he had been the one to win it. The aftermath was not as explosive as the climax, but it was far more definitive. Jessica did not choose to be a part of their new reality. Faced with the prospect of living on a teacher's salary and getting a real job, she packed her designer bags 2 weeks later. The divorce was swift and surprisingly uncomplicated. Without access to the trust, she had no funds for a protracted legal battle, and she seemed more interested in finding her next benefactor than fighting for a past she could no longer control. The weeks that followed were a time of quiet healing for Daniel and me. He moved into our guest room for a while, needing the space and the familiar comfort of his childhood home. We didn't talk much about Jessica or the trust. Instead, we talked about his mother. He would ask me to tell him stories about when Clara and I were first dating, about the struggles we faced starting out, about the simple joys that had defined our life together. We were rebuilding our relationship on the solid ground of shared memory and mutual respect. One crisp Saturday in December, we drove to the cemetery. We stood before Clara's headstone and Daniel placed a small bouquet of white roses, her favorite, at the base. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see things clearly, Mom," he whispered, his hand resting on the cool stone, "but I get it now. I promise I'll make you proud." Watching him, I felt not triumph, but a profound sense of peace. My wife's legacy was safe, my son was safe. In the new year, Daniel and I sat down in my study to formally review the trust. It was no longer a conversation between a trustee and a beneficiary, but between a father and a son. With my guidance, he took an active role in understanding the investments, the tax implications, and the long-term strategy. We amended the charter together, adding a new clause that he himself suggested. A percentage of the trust's annual income would be automatically donated to a scholarship fund for history students at the university where he taught. He was turning his inheritance from a safety net into a source of positive impact, a true legacy. Life settled into a new, gentler rhythm. Our first Thanksgiving together, a year after the infamous phone call, was quiet and deeply meaningful. We cooked Clara's favorite dishes, shared stories, and raised a glass to her memory. The house didn't feel empty or desolate. It felt peaceful, filled with the enduring warmth of family. I still sit in my favorite armchair and look at the photograph on the mantel. I see the same smiling faces, the same deep love captured in that single moment, but my feelings have changed. The sharp edges of grief have softened and the ache of loneliness has been replaced by a quiet gratitude. I had faced the ultimate test as a father and a trustee, and in doing so had not only protected my wife's legacy, but had also guided my son back to himself. The silence in the house is no longer a void. It is a space of peace, a testament to a family's resilience and the enduring power of love.